Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Obviously, you know what the hot topic is around UGA football right now. That is the incredible level of activity that seems to be coming to the surface as it relates to Georgia recruiting. 2 commits for the Dogs since we last spoke. We'll cover both of those here today, and we'll talk about how this fits into a larger arc narrative, if you will, as it relates for Georgia in its 2024 class. I think this is going to be fun. Couple of things I don't think you should miss about what Georgia's added here over the course of the last 24 hours. That's going to be good. We also have what I think is a little bit of an interesting response by Georgia to a hot topic that's probably honestly not all that important, but this time of year things sometimes take on a larger level of importance they may actually deserve. We have a kind of an example of that, but it's all in good fun. We'll do that here in a couple of minutes. Connor Riley stops by. That's going to be good. There's also kind of some weird news out there in college sports right now that I think we need to cover. Some kind of strange stuff taking place as the business part of all of this kind of creeps into our field of vision, maybe a little bit more than we would prefer that it does. But nonetheless, we'll talk about all of it here over the course of our time together. I've also got some housekeeping notes I got to give you here today too, because we have some updated stuff to share with you about the next few days in the show. We'll cover all of that ground here over the course of our time together. It's going to be a fun one. We're glad you're here for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a lot going on with Georgia recruiting. I don't think you should miss any of it, so we're going to talk about that right now off the top of our program. Since we last spoke here as part of DawgNation Daily, either the live video show yesterday morning or the recorded live podcast that you may have consumed a little bit later on. Since I last spoke to you sitting in this chair speaking to this microphone, Georgia's actually added 2 commits for its 2024 class. And one of these actually kind of popped while we were doing the R.S. Andrews cool down on video yesterday, kind of late morning, early afternoon. And then here just this morning, very early, another one has been added in. So let's give shouts out to both these guys and then sort of talk about what this means here for a moment. Starting with Colton Heinrich here. Nice graphic here. Heinrich says, blessed to join the Dog Nation. How about them dogs? So he's already got the lingo down using Dog Nation. How about them dogs? So clearly he's well-versed in all of that. Also, a really nice looking edit. The all-black uniform with the red helmet, that looks good there as well. And one of the things I never get tired of seeing is the national championship rings, the national championship trophies there in the background. Of course, bottom left-hand corner of that graphic, you also see tight end tough, which Georgia obviously is. And Heinrich, after having been at Georgia this past weekend, making the announcement, his pledge for Georgia right there. Another certainly trophy on the wall here for Todd Hartley, the Georgia tight ends coach, who has just made such a name for himself here at UGA. And when you make a list around the country of the very best position coaches in all of college football, obviously Todd Hartley has earned a spot there on that, and Heinrich's the latest example of that. I'll admit that this is a player that I've only just recently kind of gotten familiar with. There had been some chatter about him leading into this Scavenger Hunt weekend this past weekend. He'd been getting some attention kind of before that. You're talking about a guy that the 24/7 Sports Composite ranks as the number 633 player nationally, the number 31 tight end, and the number 93 player in the state of Florida. So from a ranking standpoint, you can take that down now, but from a ranking standpoint, this is a little bit different kind of player than certainly Georgia's targeted the tight end position, and kind of a different player than Georgia sort of targeted overall. But at this point in time, obviously Todd Hartley has set his sights on Heinrich, and Heinrich was kind of quick to respond. And then in addition to that, this morning you maybe woke up to some good news as another player jumped on board to be a part of this 2024 class for Georgia. We're talking about Marcus Harrison here. Harris, another really good-looking edit from him, committed to the Bulldogs. And his caption on Twitter said, after a conversation with Stacey Searles and Kirby Smart, I'd like to announce that I'm 100% a Georgia Bulldog. Now, let me give you one kind of tiny aside here. This is sort of not all that important, but I am kind of glad to see this. And I think that Drew Miller's announcement the other day sort of did this there as well. I'm sort of glad now that recruits, I think Miller did this. Obviously, Harrison does that there. They've kind of gone back to saying that they're 100% committed. I sort of feel like for a while there we had this arms race of somebody said they were 110% committed. Then before you knew it, somebody was 10,000% committed. And eventually you're sort of getting into like mathematical possibilities, right? You could only be 100% committed. So nice to see, Harrison reflecting that and Miller reflecting that the other day, that we're kind of back into the realm of what's mathematically possible here in terms of the percentage of commitment these players have. But nonetheless, when you read the story about Harrison there at DawgNation.com, the one thing that jumps out to you really quickly is this is a gigantic dude. He's 6'7", 6'8", whatever it is, well in excess of 300 pounds. And when you're looking at, in Harrison's case, another kind of three-star type prospect, number 606 nationally, 48 rated offensive tackle, number 3 player from the state of New York. When you're looking at someone kind of from that sort of three-star category, I think the thing you're looking for is if they're going to have a chance to really succeed at the college level, if they're going to have a chance to be much better than their high school recruiting ranking would suggest is likely for them, then you've got to lean on an elite trait to be able to do that. Sometimes that means it's a wide receiver, something like that has an incredible level of speed, or in the case of an offensive lineman like this, it's someone who just has gigantic size, because ultimately, if you've got that kind of size, the height that provides great leverage for you, the weight to back that up, then that's the kind of elite trait that just gives you a chance to succeed at the college level that a smaller player doesn't necessarily have. That doesn't mean all bigger players are better, but all bigger players have an opportunity to use their size in a way the smaller player just can. And so that's kind of what you're looking for, I think, sometimes when you see that kind of three-star prospect. You're looking at someone who sort of has that elite trait. But to be completely honest here, Harrison, much like Heinrich before him, is a player that, I had learned a little bit more about Heinrich the last, I guess a couple of weeks leading into the Scavenger Hunt. Harrison, on the other hand, is not a player that I really probably felt like I knew all that much about necessarily. So if you're a UGA fan, you're trying to make sense of, okay, well, these are players that we haven't talked about as much here on DawgNation Daily. These are guys that you're only just now getting yourself acquainted with. So what does all this mean for a Georgia fan who's obviously really excited about the state of the recruiting efforts for Georgia on the heels of Dylan Raiola's commitment last week? Here's the part of this that I don't think should be missed. When you see this flurry of activity, Heinrich jumping on the chance to commit to Georgia after the Scavenger Hunt this past weekend, Harrison very quickly after that announcing his pledge, going public, conversation with Stacey Searles, Kirby Smart, conversation. They give him the green light to commit, and there's no hesitancy whatsoever. There's no temptation to wait. There's this immediate need to sort of jump in on this 2024 class. I don't think you should miss the speed with which all of this is happening, because speed suggests scarcity, and the lack of speed would suggest the opposite of that there too. There's the old kind of cliche in recruiting that sometimes the spots are getting tight. Well, when you see guys like Heinrich and guys like Harrison leaping at the chance to commit to Georgia here, no more waiting, no more visiting, no more leveraging it for how much money can I get from here, whatever else. When you see none of that going on, when you see guys quickly jumping at the chance to be a part of this Georgia signing class, you see the sort of speed that would indicate that positions in this class are pretty scarce. And so if Heinrich and Harrison in themselves are not recruits that you necessarily feel like all that much, the fact they're jumping on board so quickly would lead you to believe that a lot of other guys who either haven't gone public yet or maybe haven't officially made up their mind yet, there is momentum moving these players towards the University of Georgia. Otherwise, you would have maybe more of a temptation for Heinrich or Harrison to sort of wait things out and sort of see, do they come down off a visit high? Do they change their mind? Whatever else. The fact they're not doing that, the fact they're leaping here at the chance to be a part of the Georgia class would certainly lead you to believe that they know they got to get in now, or they may not be room to get in later because of just how much recruiting momentum Georgia is building. And that obviously includes some of the names we've been talking about over the course of the last couple of days. Couldn't help but notice, I guess this tweet has now been deleted, but the number 2 prospect in the country just behind Dylan Raiola is Jeremiah Smith, the 5-star wide receiver committed to Ohio State. But Jeremiah took his official visit to Georgia this past weekend, and as you know, these Ohio State fans, many of them are very thin-skinned, and I say that with all love and kindness. The truth is they just get their feelings hurt a lot more easily. It seems like when we get our feelings hurt down in the SEC, most of us have developed kind of a lot of scar tissue that we sort of expected for Georgia fans. Well, of course, Alabama or Florida, if they're able to, or somebody else, of course they're going to try to host, our team's commitments, and of course they're going to try to make whatever pitch they can. They're going to negative recruit against Georgia. They're going to make up stuff about Georgia. there is this sort of sense that sometimes all is fair in love and recruiting. And for those of us who kind of live down in the SEC, we've just sort of gotten used to that. Up in the Big Ten, they don't play quite like that. They don't seem to throw elbows quite as much in recruiting. They don't seem to play quite as rough up there, and they get their feelings hurt a lot easier. And so a lot of Ohio State fans have apparently had their feelings very much hurt about Jeremiah Smith's official visit to Georgia. So one of the things a lot of folks noticed was that Smith put out a tweet for a minute, and I believe I was looking at his feed earlier this morning. I think he's deleted this. But nonetheless, let me show you the deleted tweet from Jeremiah Smith, who says, "I thought taking a visit was part of the recruiting process." Which only stirs up these Ohio State fans even more. They are apparently very bothered by the fact that now Smith's also going to visit Florida here coming up pretty soon for reasons unbeknownst to me. But nonetheless, visiting Georgia this past weekend, all indications are the visit for Jeremiah Smith went very well there, Georgia. He seems to be enjoying his recruiting process. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Pulling Smith away from Ohio State is a very difficult challenge for UGA. Probably, Ohio State probably recruits wide receivers as well as anyone recruits anything, as well as Georgia recruits various position groups. You can certainly say Ohio State recruits the wide receiver spot that way. So we are certainly not going to pretend that it's an easy pull to wrestle Jeremiah Smith away from Ohio State. Just not going to do that. But nonetheless, when you get him on campus, when you're hosting him, when he seemingly has a good time, you clearly have a chance there, and it's that chance that seems to bother Ohio State fans. So the takeaway from all this is that there are clearly a lot of recruits who've either been at Georgia, about to be at Georgia, going to come back to Georgia. There is clearly a lot of interest on the part of a lot of Georgia fans about some of these guys, Jeremiah Smith included. And we don't quite have the resolution of those recruiting storylines as of yet, but when you see how quickly, on the heels of a scavenger hunt this weekend, ahead of a month of June that's about to be, whoa boy, crazy for the Dogs, the fact that guys like, Heinrich and Harrison are leaping at the chance to commit to Georgia, that would lead you to believe they know that coming behind them is a whole lot of recruiting momentum. And I guess the overall evidence of that is the fact that there's so much happening with guys like Heinrich and Harrison here right now. Now, let me make one more kind of point about this, and then we will move off of the topic of recruiting, at least for a moment. Here is the other thing that I don't think you can miss about Georgia. And when you kind of talk about, okay, what is the thing that makes Georgia Georgia? Obviously, we talk about recruiting. And clearly, since Kirby Smart has been here, I don't know that anybody's been better at kind of acquiring and pulling in the elite 5-star talent, the very high 4-star talent, the future first-round type picks in the NFL. That's clearly a bedrock foundation of what has made Georgia Georgia. And to go along with that, there is also this development that seems to take place for UGA where guys come here and they seemingly make the most of their opportunity, and Georgia earns praise for that. Think about the way in which Howie Roseman, the Philadelphia Eagles GM, has talked about Georgia being kind of a one-stop shop for everything that his NFL team needs based on how those guys are being developed there at the University of Georgia. So we credit the talent acquisition abilities of Kirby Smart, the ability to go out and win these recruiting battles. Guys like Todd Hartley doing that. Stacey Searles doing that now. We credit the development that takes place for these guys while they're at Georgia. You couldn't win 2 straight national championships if you weren't doing that. But, y'all, I think the thing that we still don't quite fully appreciate about Georgia is there is a scouting element for UGA that I just think is a huge part of what has made the Dogs so successful. And I don't think that Kirby Smart and these Georgia coaches talk about this very much because, frankly, this might be one of those sort of secret things they want to keep secret because pretty clearly, whether you want to cite Jordan Davis or Javon Bullard or even a guy that's no longer here like an A.D. Mitchell, Georgia has found diamonds in the rough for players who, from the word go, were immediately better than their recruiting ranking would have suggested. Now, I'm not telling you that's what Heinrich's going to be or Harrison's going to be, but if a program like Georgia is interested in you, that is obviously far more important than whatever your recruiting ranking is because for Georgia, the proof is in the pudding. Now, it's an old story, an old cliche down here in the SEC that if my program takes a 3-star, that means he's a diamond in the rough, and if your program takes a 3-star, that means you're not very good at recruiting. I realize that's kind of a cliche and sort of an old, tired debate, but at Georgia, there is enough evidence to suggest that if Georgia's going out and getting these kinds of guys, then it truly believes they must be pretty good. And given the fact that Georgia has identified diamonds in the rough of the 3-star variety before, then Georgia's opinion on this carries a whole lot of weight. But more importantly than that, as we said a moment ago, that this appears to be kind of the early ripples of a big tide that's about to roll in, with major recruits announcing their pledge here to the University of Georgia. With a lot of exciting recruiting weekends on tap for this summer, the recruiting momentum that Georgia has right now is seemingly obvious. Dylan Raiola got it started, and there are many more big names who appear to be on the way. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us. Live on video every morning, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on App and Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We're available as a podcast, Apple, Spotify, all kinds of podcast platforms, including posting the show each and every day on the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just really appreciate you choosing to watch or listen to the show somehow, whichever way works for you. We're just glad it does, and we're glad to have you with us. Big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, who make it all possible there as well. Jay and the entire team over there, big UGA fans. They love it when good things happen for Georgia because they're proud partners of UGA. And I love telling the story of a company like this that's been so supportive of UGA. It's just kind of fun to do business with those that support the Dogs. But I'm especially appreciative for those of you who support Engineered Solutions of Georgia there as well, because they are longtime loyal partners of ours here at DawgNation Daily there as well. They've been as good a friend to us as anybody has. And I couldn't do this show each and every day. Couldn't sit in the studio and have all these resources available for me to communicate with you if not for great sponsors like our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. So I truly appreciate them, and I appreciate all of you for your support of them, especially if you find yourself as a homeowner in need of a foundation issue or a waterproofing issue. When you've got those problems around your house, trust our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because the word solution is right there in their name. They are a solutions-based company because they know if you're a homeowner, these are kinds of problems that can kind of keep you up at night. They can kind of keep you worried, have you concerned. But what you find out is when you reach out to our friends there, sometimes it's a more simple fix than you realize. They can tell you to go to the hardware store and pick up a whatever, and that'll take care of whatever you need. In other cases, though, the work is more substantial, and all the more reason to trust Engineered Solutions of Georgia for that, because they have got an entire team of engineers on staff. There's nobody else in our marketplace that can put that level of resource to work for you to solve your foundation and waterproofing issue. So trust our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And if you see cracks in the walls, some sort of unsettled situation down in the floor of your basement or something like that, or water creeping in where it's not supposed to be, I want that to be a cue to you. Oh, yeah, BA was talking about Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Maybe it's time to reach out and give them a call. The good news is phone number could not be easy to remember. Simply dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, we're going to speak to Connor Riley here today. That is always a lot of fun. Prior to that, I want to do a couple of things. First of all, allow me to give some housekeeping update for you here for a moment. We're obviously entering into kind of a summer time of year, and for many of you, that means a chance to take some vacation. I am very lucky in the fact that next week I get the chance to sort of step away and have a little bit of vacation with my family there as well. We are really looking forward to that, and obviously that prevents me from being here live doing the show with you. So let me give you an idea how next week is going to work. So Monday is Memorial Day, and obviously we'll be certainly thinking about those who have given their lives in support of our country and the freedoms we enjoy. Memorial Day, a very important day on the calendar. It's also a holiday, and in some respects, it's kind of the kickoff unofficial to the summer season. And traditionally, we have not had a show on Memorial Day because of that. And this upcoming Monday, we will have no show, no pre-record, no show. We'll just be off on Monday for Memorial Day. We'll also be off on the 4th of July coming up there as well. Those are a couple of summer holidays we essentially take off and don't have a show. Monday, Memorial Day, will be an example of that, and hope you get a chance to be off yourself. And obviously, thinking about the things that have made our country great, but of course, enjoying that time with family, friends, everything else. I hope you get a chance to do that on Monday. Then, after that, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, those 4 days, I'm going to be taking some vacation, and we have a great collection of pre-recorded shows we're going to be airing for you. We've been working on these a little bit. I've also invited you to be a part of this there as well. If you follow me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, one of the things I asked yesterday is for some bold predictions involving Georgia football, some bold predictions. I'm going to share some of your answers to that next week. Looking forward to being able to do that. Going to share those next week as a part of something we're going to be doing. We're going to be asking a lot of our DawgNation guests to sort of give us some bold predictions next week. You're going to get a chance to do that. I'm going to weigh in on that there as well. This is going to kind of serve as a little bit of a season preview for us. I think it's going to be a really fun thing to do. So no show Monday because of Memorial Day. pre-recorded Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week. I'm enjoying a little bit of vacation time, and then I'll look forward to being back with you after that the following week. We've got a great summer coming up here at DawgNation and DawgNation Daily. Got some fun giveaways we're going to be doing. We've got some incredible content we're going to be sharing. It's going to be an awesome, awesome summer here, heading towards the Go for 3 and 23 mission that'll be here before you know it. So all of that said, before we talk to Connor Riley, let's get ready to go around the DawgHouse here for a moment. And yesterday, there was an example of something that just sort of happens in the summertime of year that doesn't really happen any other time, where a fairly innocuous statement from time to time kind of turns into a little bit of a big deal. And I've said this before. College football is the shortest season. There is just less actual action in our sport. NBA hockey, these are 80-plus game schedules. The NFL now plays a 17-game regular season schedule, to say nothing of the playoffs. Major League Baseball is 162 games. NASCAR goes from February to November. Other sports are just longer than ours is. And so we have a lot more off-season to try to pass the time. And one of the ways in which we do that, probably the main way in which we do that, is we just come up with stuff to argue about. We argue about Stetson Bennett's college diploma. We argue about Jalen Hurts getting his master's from Oklahoma. We argue about who has the best college football game day environment. And ultimately, stuff like this is just really subjective. There's really no obvious answer to it. And some of this sort of depends on when you're at what stadium, what you happen to see that particular day. But nonetheless, we're football fans. We're college football fans, and this is what we do. We argue about stuff. We even make up stuff to argue about. We'll make lists and things like that because it's just kind of fun to do that. Arguing about college football is sort of part of the sport. And so there's a statement made. There's a Barstool show. It's called, if you know what Barstool Sports is, it's called Unnecessary Roughness, or I forget, Unnecessary Roughness. It's something to do with roughness. It's a play on unnecessary roughness. And one of the hosts is Brandon Walker. Brandon's a guy I used to know a little bit, but he was saying something about Sanford Stadium not being a good game day environment. The host that he was working with kind of chimed in. She sort of expressed a similar opinion, and this got a lot of Georgia fans pretty fired up. We have a new development in this story, so as a way of kind of setting up this, let me let you hear the Barstool commentary that kind of got some Georgia fans pretty fired up. This is just from the other day.
Georgia fans are not satisfied having the best coaches, the best players. They're not satisfied winning national titles. They also are now doing this movement where Sanford Stadium is the best stadium in the country. Have you seen
they're
that?
Not just now doing it. To not forget that of all the takes that I had last year, and I went at with so many different fan bases, the Georgia fans were so mad at me about saying that Sanford Stadium is not the loudest stadium and that home field advantage there is not near as big as other places.
They keep saying that Georgia's Sanford Stadium is better than Tiger Stadium. No, it's not close.
It's not, and that's not. And Georgia fans, listen loud and clear. That is not an insult.
Sanford Stadium is not a top 5 stadium in the Southeastern Conference.
No, it's not.
Just not. It's behind LSU. It's behind Tennessee. It's behind Auburn. It's behind A&M. It's behind the Swamp. It's behind those comfortably.
So I talked yesterday about why I thought that was obviously wrong, and I don't really feel much of a need to rehash what I said there. I think the facts are clearly on Georgia fans' side if they want to argue for the kind of environment that Sanford Stadium has been over the course of the last couple of years. My only reason for even replaying this is because we have kind of a new development in this. So Georgia's official football Twitter account yesterday, and listen, this could have just been a coincidence. This just could have been whatever, but Georgia's official football Twitter account yesterday put out something that actually works pretty well as a retort to this particular conversation, if that's the way you want to take it. Let me show you this from Georgia football on Twitter. Pretty picture of Sanford Stadium. My gosh, how good does this campus look on game day? Rolling hills of Northeast Georgia, 93,000 packed between the hedges, everybody making noise, everybody being loud. And the caption here from Georgia football on Twitter is, thinking about the best atmosphere in college football, ... So we'll never really know, was that meant to be a response to the Barstool thing, or was that just happen to be a coincidence? But I think deep down we kind of know that's Georgia with its own response there. And to kind of wrap up this conversation, here's what I'll tell you. It's interesting to hear from Brandon Walker there at the beginning of that from Barstool, this idea of Georgia fans aren't content just to have the best team. Now they want the best stadium too. And this is the thing that is going to make Georgia fans, I believe, really tough to deal with over the course of the next however many years you want to go to in the future. And we've said this down the heels of both Georgia national championships. The Georgia fans were talking trash, and they were obnoxious before winning all these titles. Now that Georgia's winning at the level that it is right now, things are about to get even worse. And this is the expectation from Georgia. And it's not just the fans that drive this. It's Kirby Smart who drives this there as well. That there really is an expectation at Georgia that now Georgia will have and be the best of everything. that in 2021 it won a national championship because it maybe had the best defense of all time. But it wasn't content just to be best defense. It also has worked to create an offense that's actually as potent and as dynamic and as aggressive as what Georgia has been on defense. And future years, that's going to be even more true. Georgia, who had the best defense and kind of the best overall team, but maybe not the best quarterback, well, now it's got Dylan Raiola coming in the future there as well. Another example of in the future that Georgia really does expect to have the best of everything, and that includes the best game day environment there too. So this time of year when all these things get ranked of, hey, who's got the best whatever, who's got the best this, Georgia, I think now, rightly expects to be the best across the board at everything. And they don't want to leave anything else for any other team to sort of claim as their own or use as some sort of claim to fame there. So I realize that comes across as obnoxious, but that is the world in which Georgia currently lives, and that is certainly the world in which Georgia fans live there as well. So in all future arguments about all future facets of college football, Georgia rightly expects to be the best across the board. And there's very little evidence to suggest they're anything other than that right now. That is Around the DawgHouse here on DawgNation Daily here today. So we got a fun conversation coming up here right now. It's Connor Riley, a lot to dive into, including all of this sudden recruiting momentum for Georgia. Exactly what does it mean? What does it suggest about other big names who could be on the way? What do you say we have that conversation right now, plus a whole lot of other fun there too. Always great to have Connor as a part of what we're doing, including today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always love talking to Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Truly a treat to be able to do that today as well. And Connor, I want to get into the recruiting stuff, and I want to get into a really good story that you had at DawgNation.com the other day there as well. But let's put a bow on this topic for a minute there, too. I talked to John Stinchcomb about this yesterday. So I'm obviously a good bit older than you are. I can probably go back and cite a time in my life when I don't think the Sanford Stadium game day environment was as intense as maybe I wished it was, or maybe it could have been. And we can probably cite examples of why that might be. First of all, Georgia wasn't nearly as good then as it is now. That may be the number one example, number one reason why that was the case. But even relative to how good Georgia was back then, I don't know that the on-campus stadium atmosphere was even equal to that at times. But somewhere over the course of the last 20 years or so, and I think this really does predate Kirby Smart, somewhere over the course of the last 20 years or so, I think this has dramatically started to change. And obviously in the Smart era, I do put the on-campus atmosphere, not just the tailgating, but the actual loudness of the crowd, the intensity of the environment, I put it on par with anywhere I've been, and I've been just about everywhere. And I'm guessing you probably agree with that. What do you think of Sanford Stadium as an on-campus environment, as an intense game day atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, I started going there to games in 2012, and you think back over the time, LSU in 2013, Auburn in 2014, even those predate Kirby Smart coming to Georgia. Those were electric atmospheres, as loud as. Now, I wasn't at the 2013 LSU game, but those atmospheres were as loud as any that I've been to in my time covering SEC football. And the thing you got to understand about Barstool and what they've had to say about it, I used to work with Brandon Walker. I know who Brandon Walker is. He's saying things to get a reaction, and Georgia's the top program right now, and so it's easy to sort of try and take shots at Georgia and try and make them seem not all they're cracked up to be. This is something similar that Alabama went through the past decade, but I think the college football internet, not to go too inside baseball here, but the college football internet is so much more, I think, developed and publicly available than it was, say, maybe 10 years ago. And so, because Georgia is the proverbial top dog when it comes to this, people are going to try and find cracks and poke at things there. Look, I haven't been to a game at Ben Hill-Griffith Stadium, but I'm sorry, but there's just no way that, with a team that's not playing in very many big games, is having the same type of atmosphere that we saw, not just, obviously the Tennessee game last year, but Arkansas in 2021, Texas A&M in 2019. Those are readily big games. And yes, I think even in these last couple of years, Georgia has taken it to another level. But part of this whole thing, too, is just it's a symptom of Georgia's the best program in college football right now, and people are just naturally going to take shots at it to try and knock it down.
Yeah, we said this yesterday that, if you're going to try to do a big show and have a big audience, then you have to have an opinion about Georgia. And there's very little to say about Georgia on the field right now. In fact, we're going to do something next week on just even the anonymous coaches have finally sort of bent the knee on Georgia, which I think is kind of funny. We're going to get to that at some point next week. But you know, the only thing left now is to sort of, well, what about the fans? What about the atmosphere? Because that's about all there is left. And let me kind of share you one more theory on this. And like I said, this kind of predates you, so maybe this won't mean as much to you as it does to me. But here's the thing that I think really kind of brought Georgia fans to the forefront and really I think kind of made them understand just how impactful they could be. If you want to go back to early 2000s, this is like early days of internet. Like I don't know that the blogosphere was fully established then. We were certainly many years away from social media kind of being a thing. But, you know, ESPN was traveling around. They were doing game day on campus locations. You know, they were doing the Saturday night show with like Mark May and Lou Holtz. And so there was this awareness each and every Saturday of programs being compared with each other, atmospheres being compared. And I think that Georgia fans realize that, you know, each and every big-time college campus has a little bit of a spotlight on it, and that people are going to be paying attention to what you're doing. Is your team winning or losing? Are you, the fans, creating a really good atmosphere? And I think the growth of ESPN is kind of I guess sort of a touchstone for what's happening in college football. I think that sort of brought Georgia fans to the forefront in a way they didn't, probably weren't prior to ESPN kind of exploding with its college football coverage. And I think that kind of caused Georgia to sort of step up and say, hey, what kind of atmosphere do we want to be? And so you saw that mid-2000s, early 2000s. You saw that in some of those seasons because I think a lot of Georgia fans realized because of the way that ESPN was covering college football that there were a lot of people paying attention, and so we better make this atmosphere as good as it can possibly be.
Right. 2007 Auburn jumps to mind there. And, I mean, look, the reality is, Georgia wasn't a great program in the 90s. And most of the people that are speaking and have national platforms now, the 90s were their formative years in college football in terms of being a fan, and you just sort of remember those experiences first. And so that's why I think, for example, you see a lot of people talking all the time about, when is Nebraska going to be back? Well, in my lifetime, Nebraska has really never been all that good, especially certainly from a cognitive standpoint. So, this idea that, Nebraska needs to be good or, in Florida, I think falls into that example as well, even though obviously they found more sustained success in the 2000s. It just sort of speaks to, the way that college football sort of is right now and how it'll change going forward. 10 years from now when people my age are more sort of in your types of chairs and things like that, Oregon's going to be seen in a similar vein to the way, they talk about Nebraska and things like that. And so, it's so much of this, it's not about Sanford Stadium anymore. Any Georgia fan that I think goes to a game knows that. Anyone that has been to a game there in the last 2 seasons would find it pretty hard to argue that that's not an electric atmosphere. But, people are going to try and spout their opinions, and that just sort of speaks to, where we are in the world right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Even the time of year, people are a little bit more willing to jump on stuff like this time of year because we're just sort of looking for something to argue about. Something that's not going to create much of an argument at all, though, is the current state of Georgia recruiting. 2 commitments since we were last on the air yesterday. Obviously, Colton Heinrich, the tight end, Marcus Harrison, the offensive lineman. And the point that I made before you joined us, Connor, is the speed with which all this is happening sort of suggests that old cliche about recruiting, which spots are tight right now. People know you better jump now, otherwise there may not be a place to jump to with this 2024 class for Georgia moving forward. So even though Heinrich and Harrison in their own right are not necessarily names we have spent a bunch of time talking about, I do think it suggests there could be good news coming sooner rather than later with some of the recruits that we have paid very close attention to, because I think it's pretty unmissable right now. There is just a great deal of recruiting momentum for Georgia on the heels of the Dylan Raiola commitment last week. Do you agree with that?
Right, yeah, and this marks, I think, a change that we've sort of seen maybe a little bit in Georgia recruiting in the past couple of years, because traditionally under Kirby Smart, they've been a team that does a lot of their work late in terms of landing big-time signees, commitments, and things like that. And with the advent of NIL, with the way the recruiting calendar is set up now, with official visits being in the month of June, in May as well, I think you're more incentivized to get guys in early and make sure they're a part of your class. And I think that's what Colton Heinrich and Marcus Harrison sort of represent. Now, they're not the superstar, 5-star type guys, but they're guys that Georgia has had on campus. They've had them work out. And we've heard Kirby Smart talk enough about the importance of those visits and the importance of those workouts and being around in those circumstances. And so I think this is something you're going to continue to see, especially with Georgia, this recruiting calendar getting sped up. Justin Tell wrote a story about it last week. You've got now sort of, all right, late April, May, those are your evaluation periods. You're going out, you're checking these guys out, you're seeing what they look like in person. June is the big visit month, and then July, and really before these guys start their high school senior seasons, for most of them, they're going to have the decision made, and Georgia's really going to know by that point in time sort of where their class is in terms of what they need. And so, Kirby Smart has talked about in the past, this class, the current class that they're putting together, it's not specifically for like the next year, but it's a few years down the road. And so you lay into sort of guys that might be more developmental prospects, but I don't know how you see what Kirby Smart has done with guys who in the past have been developmental type prospects and not see the success that they had with them.
I also think, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday too, where it seems like there's just a lot less drama around recruiting than, and I don't know if it's going to be for the long haul or not, but for the moment, certainly it seems like there's a lot less drama around recruiting there would have been in the past. Dylan Raiola made no bones about the fact that he was trending towards UGA. He eventually announced the commitment, but it's almost like he didn't really need to because he was essentially already operating as if he was in the 2024 class. He comes to Georgia this weekend. Instead of like whining and dining and steak and lobster, it's a workout over at Jefferson High School where, guys are participating in football. Football players playing football. They don't just like the idea of being football players. They apparently really like football. That you just sort of see a much more business-like approach, I think, for a lot of recruits in this class as it relates to Georgia. Heinrich and Harrison may be an example of that in their own right of, hey, there's no need to wait. There's no need to contemplate. I'm the kind of player that wants what Georgia can provide me. I'm the kind of player that believes I can handle the rigor with which Georgia's going to ask me to participate. And I think that's kind of a refreshing thing here, too, that it just sort of seems like there's a very business-like approach being taken to this 2024 class right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stems back to Raiola. And look, it's been a while since Georgia has had a quarterback-type recruit. The Pied Piper thing, I think, gets overplayed sometimes. But with these super elite guys, which Raiola sort of occupies because of his talent, there's sort of a different sort of mindset that these guys sort of take after that quarterback. And while, yes, Brock Vandagriff was a 5-star quarterback in the 2021 cycle, that cycle was so weird with COVID and whatnot and what guys were able to do and prospects just being able to see each other. That was a little different. So you'd really probably have to go back to, say, Justin Fields in the 2018 signing class for Georgia to really see the last time that Georgia had this sort of effect of you've got your big-time quarterback, and he sort of sets the tone for the rest of the recruiting class, and it worked out to great results for Georgia in 2018, even with Justin moving on after his freshman season. A lot of the guys that they brought in that 2018 class, BA, you know this as well as anyone, they formed the backbone of that first national championship team. And so that is where, on the recruiting trail, having a guy like Raiola to be the face, to be the leader of your class, and sort of help you get your ducks in a row. It's one thing to have that ability as a coach, and obviously Kirby Smart does, but to get that from a player side as well, I think it's just so huge for what Georgia is trying to build with this recruiting class.
No, I think that's exactly right. You had a really good story the other day looking at, kind of Dylan Raiola being the next in line of 5-star quarterbacks who've been here at Georgia. Obviously, the first of those was Jacob Eason, who was a commit before Kirby got here, but Georgia really had to re-win that battle to get Eason here. And then you're talking about Justin Fields, and then you kind of talk about, obviously JT Daniels, who kind of transferred in here. How do you think the Dylan Raiola story kind of fits into the overall narrative of what Georgia has and in some cases hasn't done with 5-star quarterbacks in the past?
Yeah, I'm not sure all the DawgNation readers and listeners would agree that it was a good article, but I think one, it speaks to the reality of how hard it is to predict success at the quarterback position because all those guys flashed and I believe except for Daniels and Vandagriff who were still in college, Fields was a first-round pick and Eason was a fourth-round pick as well. So there is clearly some level of talent there that those guys had, but for whatever reason, they couldn't necessarily get it to translate onto the field for Georgia. And there's a chance that, that turns out to be the case with Dylan. And Georgia's got another really talented quarterback in this class in Ryan Puglisi as well that they feel very confident in what he's going to bring, along with, Brock Vandagriff to possibly still be around, as could Gunnar Stockton. And so, I think, 5-star quarterbacks, obviously, they draw a lot of attention. And, at Georgia, look, on that aspect, in one sense, sure, you haven't had the 5-star quarterback go on to be a first-round draft pick. And yes, there is, I believe, some value in that. But, Georgia won 2 straight national championships. And so I think it sort of speaks to what Kirby Smart is building. And while yes, it's nice to have elite quarterback talent because we've seen, in semi-recent years, Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. Having an elite quarterback can help you overcome some other issues of your roster. But Georgia and Kirby Smart, I think, have really tried and succeeded in quarterback-proofing their roster. And while, yes, Stetson Bennett was a huge reason why Georgia won a national championship last year, the 2021 team, I don't necessarily believe that was the case. And so I think Kirby wants to build a team that is not necessarily dependent on a quarterback. And while having a guy like Dylan Raiola is a huge luxury, I think you're going to still see that continue. And just because Raiola is the superstar talent, he's not going to be the sole or biggest reason Georgia wins another national title if he is on campus and does so as the team's quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that there's a tendency to sort of get the Raiola thing wrong on both sides. On the one hand, there are some people who probably would view him because he's a five-star, because he's the number one recruit in the country. Therefore, he's a can't-miss prospect. And ultimately, there really isn't such a thing as a can't-miss prospect in college football. Even for someone like Raiola who has a prodigious skill set, nothing is guaranteed. And on the other side of that, Connor, there's also the kind of cynicism that kind of creeps in because people remember the Justin Fields stuff, or they remember J.T. Daniels not quite living up to his five-star billing, or whatever you want to cite. I think Jacob Eason's probably an example of that too, and so therefore they have a tendency to think, we've heard of these five-star quarterbacks before, they're overrated. I think there's a tendency to get this wrong on both sides, that obviously the chances of Raiola being successful are greater than just a typical quarterback because of the fact that the rating's not kind of pulled out of thin air. But on the other hand, nothing is guaranteed, and you can't be certain of anything. Even for someone like Raiola, whose success I think is more probable, probable does not round up to a guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've even seen it this spring with Arch Manning in the way, I don't want to say torn down, but the way he's been talked about and discussed there. And so there are no, I think you're right to point out there are no guarantees. As many five stars as Georgia has signed, not every one of them works out. And look, there have been people that have gone back and done the research. 50% roughly of five-star prospects, probably don't end up working out and being the players that people thought they were going to be. I believe, 40% of 2019 five-stars have been first-round picks so far. So, that's the big thing to keep in mind with five-star discussion as well. It's not necessarily, hey, this is who's going to be a great college player. It's who's got the traits to possibly be a first-round draft pick. And those two things don't always line up and meet eye to eye. There are a long list of great college football players who just, didn't have the size, speed, whatever to make it in the NFL, but that doesn't take away from what they did at the college level. Conversely, there are just guys who are better suited to have better skills that translate to the NFL game. And so I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to five-star prospects, and not just quarterbacks, but all of them in general. There are some guys, Dominic Blaylock comes to mind, even though obviously injuries sidetracked his career. He wasn't, by definition, at the end of his cycle, a five-star prospect, but when he came on the campus, there weren't 31 or 32 better freshman college football players that year than Dominic Blaylock. And so I think that's something where, keep in mind with those rankings and the way that those guys are divvied up, that's what it's for. It's not for determining, hey, who's going to be a great college football player.
All right, before I let you go, I want you to do something for me here. I don't have a fancy graphic for this, but you and I were talking a little bit off the air this week. Next week while I'm on vacation, we're going to have a little bit of a theme around the show. We're going to look at some bold predictions, and I've invited Georgia fans to share some of their bold predictions for the upcoming season, and you gave me a great list of bold predictions yesterday. So, Connor, I'm going to give you the floor here. You can share as many of these as you want to, just to kind of set the stage for sort of the fun conversation we're going to have next week, and because you've clearly got the right idea when it comes to bold predictions. Now, not every bold prediction is going to come true. That's why it's bold. If it was an easy prediction, it wouldn't be quite so bold. So I think, have got a great template for what a bold prediction sort of feels like. So give us a couple of these if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I've got, I would say, 3.5 bold predictions. And I'm going to start with the one that, I'm going to make a weird little sandwich here, but we're going to go, a Georgia defensive back is going to win the Thorpe Award this year. I don't know which one it's going to be, but I think they've got three great candidates in Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard, and Malachi Starks. Again, don't know which one it's going to be, but I think with what they have on this defense this year, I think you're going to get another Thorpe Award winner with what they have in the secondary there. 2, this is going to be a sensitive subject to some. Georgia's really going to wish they had Justice Haynes. Specifically, I think if you put him on this team, I don't think that there is any sort of discussion about, can this team really three-peat? Because I think that running back position is the one where I have big concerns. And look, you called his last high school game. That kid is a stud, and he's going to make plays for Alabama.
Yep.
The half, and I can't fully make this, but I think there's a real chance that we never see another Kirby Smart Nick Saban game. And the reason being, I just don't know if Alabama's going to get to the SEC championship game this year. And so while I think that, Nick Saban has a really strong freshman class that he brought in, and he's going to want to stick around for a few years to see that group develop, I do think that there's a world where if the schedule doesn't line up properly, Georgia might have to wait a few years to play Alabama again, and who knows if Nick Saban is still around there. And then the last one, by the end of this season, Brock Bowers will be the undisputed best player in Georgia football history. And by that, I mean he will have led Georgia in receiving once again. He will be a first-team All-American, probably a Mackey Award winner as well. I think Georgia's going to possibly win another national championship. He's going to be, I think, on offense, the biggest reason why. And I think when you look at the totality of his career at that point, 3 national championships potentially, 3, I believe, All-American honors, 2-time Mackey Award winner, as best player at his position in college football. Pretty much from the moment he stepped on campus, he was one of the best players. And when you factor in the winning and the impact that he had on Georgia's offense, I don't think there's going to be a case to be made for Herschel Walker anymore. And so Herschel obviously had a fantastic career. He deserves to be honored for what he did as a college football player. But I think with the season Brock Bowers is capable and going to have, I don't think there's going to be much of a debate after the season anymore who the best Georgia Bulldog of all time is.
Connor, those are fascinating, bold predictions. It's exactly what we're looking for, and Georgia fans have been sharing theirs with us there too, so it's going to make for a fun series of shows next week. Let me make one response to one of yours. Now, I could talk for hours about all of them. Let me make one response to one of yours that just kind of jumps off to me. Looking at your prediction about a Georgia defensive back winning the Thorpe Award, I think as a fan, if I could wish the Thorpe Award on someone, I'd probably wish it on Kamari Lassiter, because I sort of expect the Georgia safety situation to be pretty good, between, a year older Malachi Starks and kind of a position shifting Javon Bullard here. So I feel pretty good about the Georgia safety position. Therefore, if Lassiter were to play at a kind of a best defensive back in the country type level over there at cornerback, that to me is the kind of positional growth, player growth, personal growth for an individual player that might have the single largest impact on Georgia collectively as a team. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and the reason I think Kamari might right now have the best odds to do it if I'm, making an odds list. The only thing that would maybe lead me to believe that they don't do that is maybe just teams decide they don't ultimately want to throw at Kamari because he's, I think, as talented as Georgia has had at a cornerback. He's long. He's a really mentally sharp player. He's going to be a guy who's a captain for this team this year. And the biggest reason I think that why he might not win it is that just teams don't elect to try and throw at him and target him in coverage. And I think that, in response, could end up leading him to not necessarily getting the attention or their stats that would warrant a Thorpe Award.
And then very quickly, since you brought up the Kirby Saban thing, which I think is a really fun, bold prediction, the idea they may never coach against each other again, just based on, this kind of being the potential end for Nick Saban. Here's what I'll tell you about Alabama. And the more I look into this, the more I kind of come to this conclusion. Connor, college football has a way of surprising us. Sometimes things end up being way different than we think they're going to be. But that doesn't always happen. There are moments in which things work out exactly the way that we think they're going to. And this could be one of those situations here for Alabama where right now on paper, it just sort of seems like they've got some problems. And sometimes college football does work out the way that you think it might. And sometimes what we see take place during the fall is sort of foreshadowed during the summer. This really may not be a college football playoff level Alabama team. This may not be a SEC contending level Alabama team. What appears true on face value, Connor, that may just be the truth, and this is not what the Crimson Tide has been, and maybe that does suggest, Saban kind of nearing the end here. It may just be as cut and dry as that.
Right. They've got to replace both their coordinators this year, and that's not going to be easy. And it sounds like in addition to replacing coordinators, they're going to be structurally changing what they do on the offensive side of the ball. And look, there's a lot of talent there. I just talked about Justice Haynes. Maybe they're able to finally figure out that offensive line, which has been well recruited, but it hasn't played up to its potential, in my opinion, the last 2 years, and that's a big reason why I don't think Alabama won a national title in either of those 2 seasons. They've got some promising guys at the wide receiver position, but they've ultimately got to go out there and make plays. And look, the reality is with Alabama in recent years, this hasn't been a defensive first team. And so I think, if there's a commitment to getting back to that, maybe this whole thing changes. But, they're a team that just has not won with their defense in recent years. And I don't know if that's something that you can change on a dime in one season. And so I'll be really interested in seeing how they go about doing that this season.
Connor, really good stuff. I appreciate that. Great discussion here, and I know it kept you long, but really fun conversation. Thanks for doing it with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by SOG. It's really great to have you here, and we'll look forward to obviously getting a chance to do this again very soon there as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, B.Ed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think that's really good. It's an example of what bold predictions are. Not bold predictions, B-O-W-L, but bold, B-O-L-D, bold predictions are. And the Alabama thing is very interesting. And obviously, to make a prediction about a Thorpe Award winner, very interesting. What Connor says about Brock Bowers, we may pull out and kind of do as a little bit of a separate thing, too, because I've got a bold prediction as it relates to Bowers. My overall take on that, slightly different than his is. So we'll kind of cover that a lot in the days to come. But as I said before, this is what the sport of college football is. Part of the sport is sort of arguing, staking your claim on a hot take, staking your claim on kind of a bold projection or bold, prediction or something like that. That's just what we do, right? We share those kinds of things, and that's why shows like this are, for me at least, a lot of fun. Hopefully it is for you there as well. But really good stuff from Connor Riley on all of that. All right, I've got some SEC through stuff I want to get to, including a little bit of an update on some of the games that really matter to begin this year's season. We'll get to that here in a moment. Prior to that, though, let us go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, next week I am taking some vacation time, but I am not going to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, at least not yet. Next week I'm just sort of not at work. But looking forward to having a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here coming up very soon. And I'd invite you to be excited about the same kind of thing here, because having something to look forward to is just one of the best things in life. And this time of year, kids are almost out of school. It seems like in some cases work kind of slows down a little bit for some of us during the summer. Just having that great summer experience is just so much fun. And there's really no better experience you can have than a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. That's true if you're taking one of these 3 or 4 night sailings that go to the Bahamas, or maybe you're taking one of these 7 night sailings that are visiting some of the great other ports like Jamaica or St. Thomas, or obviously Labadee, private destination there in Haiti. Many of you are getting excited about a Royal Caribbean cruise to Alaska and the chance to go out and see some of that. That's something I've never actually gotten a chance to do before, but at some point in time I hope I get a chance to. Well, when I do, you better believe I'm going to use Jessica Slater, terrific travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to help book up this Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She's got you covered on all of that. I was actually spending some time yesterday. One of the things that I guess is kind of weird about me, I'm not super active on Facebook, to be honest with you. I have a Facebook account, but I don't really go on Facebook very much. But I was kind of on we had a DawgNation Cruise Facebook group, I guess you would call it. I was kind of spending some time on there and looking at all the fun photos from the recent DawgNation Cruise. Just reminds me of how much fun all that was. And hopefully we'll get a chance to sail with some of you here sometime in the future. And hopefully you'll get a chance to experience the fun that so many of us got a chance to experience on board with Royal Caribbean for our DawgNation Cruise. Kind of a great thing. All right, so as we go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here, there's a little bit of an update from our friends at the DraftKings Sportsbook on some of these Week 1 point spread lines. Now, many of you don't care about gambling. I can certainly understand that, and you have every right not to care about that. But what we say is that point spreads are interesting projections. If you're kind of trying to get a sense of what the common opinion is about how a game might turn out, point spreads are a pretty good reflection of some of that. And so we have a little bit of an update to provide you here from our friends at the DraftKings. So Vanderbilt, after just absolutely blasting Hawaii a year ago, gets a chance to play them again this year. They're an 18.5-point favorite. This time, I think that's a home game. I think that's a home game. Maybe Vanderbilt's going back there again. I don't know. But you look at Week 1. Here's where things get kind of interesting. So Florida going to Utah. Very tough Week 1 type game. We've said this before. You got this kind of sandwich here of Florida playing a tough Week 1 game against Utah, concluding the regular season with a very tough in-state rivalry game against Florida State, and a bunch of SEC in the middle. That is a tough slate there for Florida, and they've kind of hovered kind of just under 10 points or at 10 points of being an underdog there in Salt Lake City. Right now, Gators being listed as a 9.5-point underdog against Utah. We thought last All right, I think we're back now. Sorry about that. Not quite sure what happened there. We're talking about Florida, 9.5-point underdog there against Utah. Sorry for the hiccup there on that. Hopefully you have stayed with us throughout all of that. Sorry about that. But nonetheless, the point is that we thought that Florida last year was going to beat Utah at home because it's frankly just not all that likely the team in the Pac-12 is going to travel into SEC country and come out a winner. That just doesn't happen very much. And what we've said is you don't get credit for beating Pac-12 teams here in the SEC. Georgia doesn't get credit for beating Oregon, really. Florida doesn't get credit for beating Utah, even if Utah is the better overall team. It's still an SEC team playing at home. But it's about to be Florida going out to Salt Lake City, and that, my friends, is likely not to go well. Odds makers certainly favoring the Utes by a wide margin there. Here's what I think is also a very interesting point spread, especially given the fact that by the end of the year last year, South Carolina's playing pretty well. But in Charlotte, week 1, neutral site game, a matchup we've seen early seasons in the past, you've got South Carolina and North Carolina. And right now, UNC is a slight favorite. They're a 1.5-point favorite against South Carolina. Now, a lot of that probably relates to Drake May, the potential number 1 overall pick in next year's NFL draft, or certainly a very high first-round pick in next year's NFL draft. Maybe a lot of this is just sort of respect for May. But if you're South Carolina, this is the kind of game you need to win because Tar Heels play zero defense. At least they have played zero defense. And, while Spencer Rattler is probably not a quarterback in the same category of a Drake May, this is supposed to be one of the real weapons that South Carolina has going for it. A veteran quarterback like Rattler, who really showed you a lot last year, especially late in the season. The Tennessee game, the best example of that. But this is a guy who I think has a chance to make kind of an additional name for himself in the SEC that may not have existed for him a year ago because it's a Bryce Young, it's a Stetson Bennett, it's a Hendon Hooker league. There were a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC a year ago that aren't there anymore. This is an opportunity for Spencer Rattler this year, and at least holding your own against Drake May would be a pretty good step in that direction. But no matter what the equation that equals this is, South Carolina needs to beat North Carolina week 1, but right now they're listed as a slight underdog. Another game of note worth kind of paying attention to here. So Tennessee against Virginia. Tennessee's a 27-point favorite there against the Wahoos. Obviously, Virginia had an awful conclusion to their season with the very sad circumstance involving the shooting there on campus. So some of the issue for Virginia has been unrelated to football. But on the Tennessee side of this, and between the white lines here for a moment, one of the things we said about Tennessee a year ago is they could demonstrate themselves as a true contender. Because the truth is, we were probably a little higher on Tennessee to begin last season than some other people were. And one of the things I said I was looking for is I wanted to see Tennessee handle business easily. When you're a 10-point favorite, can you find a way to win by 20? If you're a touchdown favorite, can you find a way to win by 17? Can you win comfortably when the market sort of expects it to be somewhat close? And last year, Tennessee sometimes did that, sometimes kind of didn't. For the most part, I guess they did okay in that regard. Probably on the road at LSU, the best example of them flexing there just a bit. But this is one of those games that if there's any remnant left from what Tennessee was a year ago as a team that's kind of top 10-ish, fringe playoff contender, is there any remnant of that left with now a new starting quarterback, new crop of wide receivers, and got a little bit of a changeover to the program? Then dominating a team like Virginia is probably an example of that. Being a 27-point favorite, finding a way to win by 35, that's a way you can really kind of show that, hey, this is a Tennessee team that's at least picking up in some form or fashion where it left off from a year ago. So Tennessee-Virginia to begin the season may not be, all that uninteresting. And then finally, it's so funny, this may be looked back on as big a game as exists in the regular season. It's week 1 in Orlando, LSU against Florida State. Both these teams have been pretty active in the transfer portal. Florida State's been quite active in the transfer portal. And LSU right now listed as a 2-point favorite against Florida State. Y'all, this is a fun game. Last year was a fun game there as well. And we sort of thought kind of a quirky anomaly for an LSU team with a first-year coach and a Florida State team that was kind of fighting for some relevance. Well, as the season wore on, you realize, you look back on it, wow, LSU and Florida State are both pretty good, and Florida State's win against LSU was really kind of a signature win. Well, this year you go into the game feeling like it's going to be really big, and I think it's going to be big for both sides because I think that LSU is a legitimate contender in the SEC. More on that next week. I think that Florida State is obviously a playoff contender in its own right, and this has a chance to be very, very fun. One more thing to get to here just for a moment. There's been a lot of weird college sports news over the course of the last few days. I want to highlight some of this here for a moment. First of all, the president of the University of Washington was quoted by Brett McMurphy, who now works the Action Network. His name's Kirk Schultz. And basically, the issue in the Pac-12 is that a previous media rights deal kind of overpaid some of the league's teams. And so now there's some new budgetary stuff coming in where these teams have to pay back some of that money. There was like a little bit of a, accounting error or something like that. And so, therefore, the money coming into each Pac-12 team in the future is actually going to be a little bit less than they anticipated it being. So what McMurphy reports is that the Washington State president says is that the Washington State's going to have a temporary freeze on all current and future vacant positions within the athletic department until further review, as well as a pause on non-essential travel, purchases, and new professional development because of significant decreases in Pac-12 revenue payments. So this is kind of a fancy way of saying Washington State is broke. They don't have enough income to pay for their outgo right now. And I don't mind telling you this. Now, this does not speak well for the future of the Pac-12. That if you've got a program like Washington State, even kind of a remote outpost type program, but nonetheless still a program in the Pac-12, and they are penny pinching to this degree to the point where they're having to freeze basically economic activity involving the athletic department, boy, I don't know what that means to the future of the Pac-12, because keep in mind, you get the Big 12 and the Pac-12 right now kind of fighting for a media rights deal at roughly the same time. And the dream scenario for both leagues is to sort of poach schools from one of the other leagues. And a lot of the sort of the fancy people in the media, the national media types, coastal elite types, have sort of been under the assumption that it was the Pac-12 who was in a position of power and strength to basically leverage a better deal for itself than the Big 12 does, or if one league was going to steal from the other, it was going to be the Pac-12 stealing from the Big 12 for, I guess, whatever reason. A lot of sort of rank-and-file fans have sort of thought that was kind of a statement unsupported by facts, and I think this issue here with Washington State suggests that, because the real value here is what they call the four corner state schools. This would be Utah, this would be Colorado, this would be both schools from Arizona, that those schools could move and go to a different league. And what it creates for, let's say that the Arizona schools, Utah, Colorado, go to the Big 12. In the case of Colorado, be going back to the Big 12. What that would create for the Big 12 is another TV window. You could play games at 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern time, and you could have an entirely different, I guess, category of inventory for television, which would make the Big 12 a little bit more lucrative, a little bit more valuable. I'm not saying this story alone suggests that these schools are going to leave the Pac-12, but it certainly is worth following. Can the Pac-12 hold itself together when you've got these kind of financial issues being reported by one of the league schools? That's certainly worth paying attention to. Speaking of, I guess now the former Pac-12, we didn't mention this, but we probably should, the fact that Mike Bohn, the USC athletic director, has resigned. Now, there's all kinds of accusations about kind of how he chose to run the athletic department, some of the things he was, I guess, alleged to said to employees, things like that. I honestly don't know that one way or another. But USC's move to the Big Ten, the hiring of Lincoln Riley, this was supposed to be a little bit of a signal that USC was now ready to kind of play at the professional level again after a good number of years, which this program was the athletic department in general was a little bit of a laughingstock and not exactly the most buttoned-up professional bunch. And out in the Pac-12, that didn't really matter because the Pac-12, frankly, has had a pretty odd era here, where you're left to wonder, does this conference even care about athletics? And so, USC not exactly being buttoned up, not exactly being professional, that didn't really matter too much because, they were in kind of a goofy league to begin with. Well, now they want to be in the Big Ten. Now they want to kind of bring the LA market to the Big Ten. There's more expectations for USC. And to have an athletic director resigning just before making that move, that in itself is pretty strange here. So I don't really know much to say about, kind of what's next for USC. But this is not a good look for a team and a program in transition getting ready to move to the Big Ten. And then finally, speaking of the Big Ten, I'll also mention this there as well. You may have seen the thing where, speaking of TV deals and stuff like that, a lot of Big Ten teams unhappy with a deal that Kevin Warren was in the midst. This is the former Big Ten commissioner now, who we think is a total mediocrity. But Warren negotiating this deal with NBC, and apparently the promise on the part of the Big Ten was a lot more primetime games, which the Big Ten teams don't like doing in November because it's cold weather. So, once again, the business of college athletics is going to come into the forefront in a way that not everybody loves here. And apparently not everybody in the Big Ten kind of happy with the ongoing negotiations as NBC becomes a little bit of a TV partner for the Big Ten. Some of those games airing on Peacock, things like that. A little bit of unrest there in the Big Ten right now, the new commissioner taking over. So, maybe worth following that there as well. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, let's give you a golden shoe. Obviously, a lot of Georgia fans loving the era of Georgia football in which we're in which there's so much evidence of the great success that Georgia has had. Jacob Yarborough shared this. He says, our office shrine finally starting to come together, and we're hoping to add some more memorabilia this year. How about a golden shoe shout-out? No doubt worthy of that. Hashtag golden shoe indeed for Jacob Yarborough. You see all kinds of great commemorative magazines and photos and framed items celebrating a great level of success for Georgia. And how good does it feel to have gone for 2 and 22 with big things expected here for the future there as well. Jacob, good stuff, golden shoe coming your way on that. And also, we believe here on this show that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. And every single day we pay homage to that with our Gator Hater Countdown. 158 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They will show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Sorry about the little hiccup there for a moment. Don't quite know what that was, but nonetheless, we're glad that you're here. Let me go to Facebook first for a minute. We'll do YouTube after that. We'll probably kind of bounce off a little bit early today because we have a lot going on around here. By the way, good to have Kaylee Manziel back in the building again, fresh off her college graduation. Nice to have her in the house today. Let's see what else. Mike Tampa Dog and Denise White Low were talking about the situation of the Big Ten. Yeah, a lot of those Big Ten teams do not want to play night games in November because it gets cold. It gets cold. Let's see what else. David West, Keith Folds, talking about Herschel Walker. So at a certain point in time, I kind of want to do this on the show. And I want to do this in a very respectful way, but there's something I think that needs to be pointed out. We just saw the passing last week of Jim Brown. And I honestly believe that Jim Brown has a case to be made as the best pro football player of all time. I think that Jim Brown is worthy of that discussion. Certainly the best pro football running back. I don't think that's much of a question, I don't believe. But you can make a case that Jim Brown, Jerry Rice in that discussion, Deion Sanders maybe in that discussion, that there's a small handful of players who would be in discussion as best pro football player of all time. I believe that Jim Brown is a rightful member of that discussion. And no doubt that Brown is a towering, iconic figure in the history of sports. But in all the retrospectives, looking back on Jim Brown's life, the one thing I never saw anybody mention, and I just think this is fair to point out, I never saw anyone mention about Jim Brown is greatest college player of all time. Now, people say, hey, he may have been the greatest athlete of all time because he was a great lacrosse player, and this is a guy that was very good at a number of sports, and he is a towering figure in sports history. But no one has said about Jim Brown, this is the greatest college football player of all time. Although back, at the conclusion of the 2019 season, he was ranked as the best college player of all time ahead of Herschel Walker. And I'm sorry, no disrespect to Jim Brown, who I think I've made pretty clear, I think is a pivotal figure in the history of this sport, but not the greatest college football player of all time. He's just not, although he was ranked that way. And Herschel Walker came in at number 2. And I just think that's a real problem. And, listen, Herschel Walker kind of in this stage of his life has become a political figure, and obviously people have a different opinion about his politics, and that's fine. We don't talk about that. I honestly don't care what you think about his politics, no matter what it is that you do think. I simply don't care. But I think it's a shame that the legacy of Herschel Walker as a player, has been somewhat erased. And I think that's a shame. And I think the people who are kind of like caretakers of the history of college football have a greater responsibility to do better than that. And, putting Herschel Walker at number 2 as the all-time greatest college football player, and I just think that's a mistake. This was one of those, they made a big deal about this. They put that as part of the college football playoff. It was a big ceremony. There was a lot of, pomp and circumstance leading up to it. And it's hard not to see this, I think, for what it is, a real error, and I think an error intentionally made. And I think it's just a real shame. So for now, not only is Herschel Walker the greatest player in Georgia football history, Herschel Walker is the greatest college football player of all time, whether, the current, I guess, winds blow in that direction or not. The truth remains the truth. Let's see what else. Now, Jamie Huff says, can you get Connor to send me what he's smoking? I love Brock, but no way he's a better tight end than Pollock, Gurley, Chubb, Herschel, or Bailey. Now, Jamie, you and I may be at odds on this, because while I am not ready to say it's possible for Bowers to be better than Herschel without Bowers being the best player of all time, I'm telling you right now that you are shortchanging Brock Bowers if you don't think that he is on his way to being, when I say on his way, I'm meaning with another year at the same level he's played the last 2 years, it is entirely conceivable that he's a better player than David Pollock. It's an entirely conceivable thing that he's a better player than Todd Gurley. I think that Brock Bowers is that good. I think that Herschel is up here. I don't think that Brock Bowers is approaching that for me yet, because I think Herschel's the best player of all time. But is Brock Bowers well on his way to being the second best player in Georgia history? I actually think that he is. And I think you're shortchanging him if you don't think that. And I just think the numbers, the results speak for themselves here. And I think that Bowers' talents sometimes get obscured by the fact that he plays on such a talented roster. But that doesn't make Bowers any less talented. So, Jamie, I don't mind telling you that it sounds like I think Brock Bowers is a lot better than you do. I think the numbers may be on my side on that. Let's see what else. Yeah, Rodney Council says Gurley's a fan favorite. He's my favorite Bulldog ever, but Brock is higher. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, certainly we will never be guilty of saying a bad thing about Todd Gurley ever, because Gurley is tremendous. But what Brock Bowers is doing, I believe, is historic. It is. And if he becomes a 1,000-yard receiver this year, from the tight end position, by the way, but if he becomes a 1,000-yard receiver this year, to go along with, 13 or 14 touchdowns as a freshman, you know, he darn near had 200 yards receiving in the national championship game this past year. I just think it'll be clear. Now, if something were to happen and, you know, maybe this year for whatever reason stops short of being some of that kind of stuff, then obviously you'd have to rethink that a bit. But based on where it looks like it's trending right now, I think a lot of historic stuff is in play for Bowers. I think it's very likely. I mean, when we did our Mount Rushmore stuff back in February, I had him on my Mount Rushmore of Georgia figures, of Georgia players. And that's, you know, maybe I'm anticipating a really good third year in keeping what the first two have been. But I believe that Brock Bowers is the best player on these two national championship teams. I do. Wayne Kirkland says another season on the same pace. Brock's got to be number 2. I think that's the case. Miriam Corbin says Herschel was much better than Pollock and those others that you mentioned. Bowers is in second next to Herschel. I think that's kind of where we're kind of heading with that. I think you're right. William Camacho says the late, great Jim Brown was certainly the best running back in the NFL. No disrespect to Herschel Walker. Herschel was the best running back in college. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's really telling that, you know, Jim Brown was named best college football player ever back at the conclusion of the 2019 season, and yet that's not really a part of any of the career retrospectives and the life retrospectives on Brown, because I think deep down everybody knows, as voluminous as Jim Brown's resume is, he is not the best college player of all time. I think that's the fact that he's not being mentioned that way as a part of any of the obituaries about his life indicates just how true that really is. Oren Chile says Pollock was a 3-time first-team All-American, 36 career sacks. Totally respect that. He is a truly, truly great player. I think that Brock Bowers has a chance to be better. Gary Holt says, do you think the SEC West is still harder than the SEC East? I think for now it kind of is. You know, look at national championship odds on that. You see Alabama in there. You see LSU in there. You know, you see these teams that are kind of, you know, mentioned, you know, near the top on some of that kind of stuff. SEC East doesn't quite have that. Jamie Huff says, since I brought him up, I'll give him a chance to respond. He says, I'm talking on-field play. Those guys didn't need anybody to help make plays. Brock is very great, but Darnell made a lot of his plays possible. Again, I think that Brock's is stupid good. Yeah, I don't dispute the fact that you think Brock is very good. Obviously, Jamie, we've commented over the years. I know how closely you follow this team. I just think we're at a difference of opinion on this. I do. I think I've got Brock in a historic category right now that I don't think you do. Which, I mean, reasonable people may disagree. It's what makes some of this kind of stuff kind of fun. But I think you're shortchanging Brock when you say that, you know, someone like Darnell made more of this possible. Brock Bowers, I feel like, runs away from people. And I think the last year, at times, I think that Georgia intentionally chose to go away from Brock. I think it knew it could do it anytime it wanted to. I think last year it intentionally chose to go away from Brock. His numbers were reduced because I think they wanted other people to feel like they were part of the offense, Darnell Washington included at times. if Georgia, and maybe this will be one of those years they just kind of turn Brock Bowers loose. Maybe this will be one of those years, and there'll be no doubt. But for everything you want to say about Stetson Bennett, I think that Bennett's career deserves to be revered. Bennett's not a better player, I don't believe, than Brock Bowers is. And, in the history of Georgia football, someone from this 2-year run, which is all we have right now, someone from this 2-year run has to be, kind of in that top category, with all due respect to Jordan Davis, who y'all know I love, and Jalen Carter and people like that. To me, it's Bowers. He's the one. G. Grace Bama Boy says Bo Jackson's the best running back I've witnessed play football. So, G, here's what I'll say about that. I'm curious how many Georgia fans would agree with me. That if we made a list of players on Georgia rivals who I have the utmost respect for, there is not a player on a Georgia-hated rival that I have more respect for than Bo Jackson as a player. Because, so I came of age, late 80s, early 90s, and Bo Jackson was the thing back then. Baseball cards, 87 Fleer, the 90 score thing where he was, holding the bat. He was in the 89 score supplemental set for football. All those Bo Jackson cards were just amazing. To say nothing of Bo Jackson and Tecmo Bowl, which was a huge deal. If you're really old school, you remember the first EA Sports college football game, the Bill Walsh college football game, where Bo Jackson was on there with 83 Auburn. And even as a Georgia fan, sometimes I'd play with 83 Auburn just because I liked being Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson. So the other day when the thing came out about Bo having the hiccups for a year, he said that, there's a story that came out the other day. He said the hiccups for an entire year, which sounds terrible. But it was in my mind, I'm thinking, I do not want a generation of young people. The only thing they know about Bo Jackson is he couldn't get rid of the hiccups. Because you go back and watch 89 All-Star game, leading the game off with that home run against Rick Russell, and he hit that thing to the moon. Obviously some of the stuff that he did in the brief career he had for the Raiders. This was a guy who was literally a Pro Bowl level running back and an All-Star level outfielder. That's an insane. He was the best athlete of your high school, except he was doing it at the professional sports level. This was an insane athlete. So there is not a lot of players from hated Georgia rivals that I have great reverence for. Bo Jackson for me would be one of those. Jerry Dogfan says Barry Sanders the best NFL running back I've seen. There's a case to be made on that too. No doubt about that. UGA boy for life, Brunetti says I'd give my right arm to see Herschel Walker and Todd Gurley and Pollock and Brock on the same team. What a pickup game that would be. Yeah, it'd be a dream team for sure. Yeah, no doubt about that for sure. I also think there's an element of Herschel Walker where his greatness, I think, is determined because of the era in which he played. At a time in which everybody in the building knew he was going to get the football, and yet he was still, for the most part, unstoppable. That, to me, sort of speaks to that for him. It's the way in which he was kind of Georgia's offense, and everybody knew he was going to get it, and you still couldn't stop him. Just a different kind of thing compared to today's running backs where, great running backs in this day and age, they just sort of benefit from the prolific passing game, which really didn't exist in college football at the same level back then. Let's see what else. Fred Gunn says Bo would be a Hall of Famer if not for injury. Yeah, the hip injury he dealt with was a very serious thing. Nature Gator says Emmitt Smith in the NFL was excellent and a Hall of Fame running back. Yeah, no doubt. You can't dispute the Emmitt Smith career. He doesn't emotionally mean the same thing to me as Bo Jackson did, but nonetheless, you can't really dispute that. And it was always really interesting for those of us who kind of came of age during the 90s, the debate comparing Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders, because Emmitt Smith was a lot less spectacular as a highlight type guy than Barry Sanders was. The Sanders highlights were unbelievable. Emmitt Smith was a lot more, kind of businesslike with his approach. He didn't have the wild cutbacks and things like that. He also played in front of a much better offensive line on a much better team. And so the debate of, well, is it better to be Emmitt Smith running behind a great offensive line, running for a great team? He obviously had, he's the record holder, right? Or at least it was. I think he still is. Barry Sanders, much worse offensive line, really terrible teams for the most part. But my gosh, what a thing he was to watch. And I guess I probably came down on the pro Barry Sanders side of that back then, but not taking anything away from Emmitt Smith, who was truly great. Shame that Emmitt never beat Georgia during his college career, but truly a great NFL running back. Spencer Clark mentioning Ricky Williams from Texas, another very good one. Andrew Hughes brings up a good point. We need to ask Jeremiah Smith how he plans to deal with the cold and snow in Ohio since he is from Florida. Very good point, Andrew. I think that this whole thing about the Big Ten teams being mad about the NBC contract because they have to play games at night. It's like, do you really, if you're Jeremiah Smith, want to go to a conference where they're afraid to play night games because of how cold it is? There is something to be said for that, my friend. There is something to be said for that. Fred Gunn says, my favorite back to watch was Sweetness. So the first NFL team I have any memory of, the very first NFL season I ever really followed was the 85 season with the Bears. And obviously, I mean, if you weren't kind of around back then, it's hard to really kind of put your finger on just how much of a cultural phenomenon the 85 Bears were. But that's also late career Walter Payton. So the point is that I was obsessed with the 85 Bears. Everybody was. But that was really more about Jim McMahon and obviously the former Georgia kicker Kevin Butler and all the guys on defense, the 46 defense. By that point in time, we were really kind of seeing the end of the Walter Payton career. So I've seen some of the highlights and things like that, but I don't have first-person account of how good Walter Payton was, although no one disputes how good he really was. Frederick Meredith says the Eagles are going to have to trade up in the 24 draft to take Brock Bowers. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Thomas Dyson says, Prime's probably my favorite football player ever. Then being on the Falcons and the Braves, I was sold. Yeah, that's another one of those guys. It's like, for people my age, Deion just has a certain and undeniable level of coolness because, I don't know that I put his certainly baseball career in the same category as I'd put Bo Jackson's baseball career. But Deion Sanders was a very capable major leaguer. Deion was terrific in the 92 World Series for the Braves. And he had handful of moments with the Yankees prior to coming to Atlanta. Deion was a good player. I think that Bo Jackson could have been something better than good, but Deion was certainly a good player. But Deion, if you're going to make a list of, hey, give me the shortest list of guys that really have a case to be the best, pro football player of all time, I think that Deion Sanders would absolutely have a big time, conversation on that. Obviously, for a lot of Falcons fans, there's some disappointment with the way in which he left Atlanta, kind of some hurt feelings as it relates to that. But what Deion did after that, he goes to San Francisco, leads them to a Super Bowl, switches teams, because back then the 49ers and the Cowboys were the big rivalry, switches teams, goes to Dallas, leads them to a Super Bowl. I mean, Deion was a difference-making guy on two different Super Bowl franchises and a lockdown corner. I mean, the absolute lockdown corner of all time, to say nothing of the punt returns and things like that. Jalen Jackson says Randy Moss may have been the most naturally talented player ever. He was an alien. Yeah, I remember obviously Moss had a great career, but I remember the excitement of his rookie season when he was just doing it to such a high level. That's when the whole idea of someone getting mossed, him jumping over people and running past people. Cowboys game on that Thanksgiving night was a big deal. And I've told you this before. If you want to make a list as someone who's lived in the Atlanta area my entire life, Braves have won 2 World Series. There are a lot of things that have kind of happened in Atlanta sports. But as good an individual game performance as the city's ever seen was Atlanta beating that Randy Moss rookie team, 98 Vikings. They were 15-1 in the Metrodome that day, and Atlanta went up there and beat them. That was a big game, y'all. That's a huge, huge win. Huge win. Fred Gunn says primetime would shut down half the field. Yeah, he really would. People wouldn't even really throw in his direction. Nature Gator on subject of Gale Sayers. You had a chance to meet Gale Sayers one time. So when the Super Bowl was here, I guess it had been the Rams-Titans Super Bowl, all of these NFL players coming to town, and Gale Sayers was just at some place, and so I went over there and saw him. A super nice guy. The Kansas Comet. I got an autograph from Gale Sayers that day, and I had him sign at Kansas Comet. I wonder what I did with that. I don't even know where that is. But got the Gale Sayers autograph, Kansas Comet. His college highlights from Kansas pretty cool. The NFL highlights really good there as well. Shorter career, right? Was his career cut short? Am I thinking about that correctly? But great collection of highlights. That's really all I really know about Gale Sayers. Playing for the Bears, having the great highlights. I believe the career was cut short, if I'm remembering correctly. Spencer Clark also mentions Michael Vick beating the Packers. Yeah, that's the first time the Packers ever lost a playoff game at Lambeau Field. Vick going up there and winning that game, that's a huge deal. You're right. That's a big deal. Jonathan Aaron says, other than the Falcons and Raiders, who are the worst when it comes to drafting teams, teams when it comes to drafting players. Yeah, I guess that's pretty bad. Seems like Washington's been really bad too. Washington also sort of seems like one of those teams that never has draft picks. I'm always kind of interested in who, like, so-and-so's first pick's not until like the third round. Like Washington sort of seems like one of those teams that never has draft picks, which is probably not a great a great strategy over the long haul. Avion Curry says that Buddy Ryan defense going back to the 85 Bears, something serious with William Perry in the middle. Yeah, William the Refrigerator Perry was a gigantic figure, not literally, figuratively, but he's such a famous player back in 85. Such a famous player. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Thomas Dyson says Michael Vick's the ultimate what if. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, obviously you think, well, Michael Vick could have been more as a player. But I do think as time passes, I think it's also appropriate to appreciate what Michael Vick was. And I realize the dogfighting thing's super controversial, and obviously that's such a disappointing conclusion of his time here in Atlanta. But let's be honest here about something for a moment. Atlanta does not have a great history, especially Matt Ryan. Definitely did not have much of a history at all. Vick won a couple of playoff games. He won at Lambeau Field. He won. What was the other playoff game he won? Oh, why am I blanking on this? I mean, he won at least another playoff game. They won. Was it the Rams? Was it the Rams that he beat? But you go back and look at that time. They made an NFC Championship game with Vic. They had some exciting games. Probably the most energized the Georgia Dome ever was. Prior to that, I think it's appropriate to see Vic hopefully appreciated as not a great player, but a very, very, very good player. Like, I'll give you like my thing here on this. What's his name? The new running back's going to wear number 7. And when I saw that, at first I was like, ooh, you're going to give away number 7? But then I realized, no, you can't really retire Vic's jersey. He didn't quite rise to the level of being a retired jersey, but he is kind of at the next level underneath that, right? I mean, it's like he's not a retired jersey. I don't know if you put him in the Ring of Honor. I don't know about all that. But whatever the level is underneath that, a very good, distinguished career here in Atlanta. Obviously some what ifs, and obviously it could have been different at the end, and some personal embarrassment and caused the franchise some embarrassment. But, this is a guy who created a lot of excitement for Atlanta too. Nature Gator says Vic beat the Vikings in a major upset during the playoffs. I think you're thinking about 98 when Chris Chandler was the quarterback for that one. Chris Chandler was the quarterback for the 98 game. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. The big moment for Vic against the Vikings was the overtime game where, I don't want to exaggerate this, but he, it's obviously sudden death. He's scoring, the game's over. He had a 50-yard rushing touchdown to win a game in overtime. Like, that's insane. That's one of the single most exciting moments I've probably ever seen in a football game. I think it was like 50 yards, right? A rushing touchdown to walk off an NFL game on the road. Let us see what else. Over at DawgNation.com, we got to go after that. Third and Will on the idea of only being able to give 100%. Yeah, this is one of those things that like a lot of people don't even really know what I'm talking about. But we had a big issue there for a while where recruits were like 110% committed, then they were 150% committed, and then before you know it, they're 10,000% committed. And eventually we've just sort of lost the plot. Like, you can only be 100% committed. Like, you run the risk of like if you're 10,000% committed, it becomes fair to ask, well, how come you ain't 1,000,000% committed, right? Like, once we sort of extend the borders beyond what's mathematically possible at that point in time, then everything is meaningless. So I love the fact that I believe that Drew Miller and Mr. Harrison both did this. They're only 100% committed, which is all you can be, which I really appreciate. So third Will, I'm glad you like that. Let's see what else. Terry says single-handedly won the Sugar Bowl on January 1981. There you go. Randy Hall pointing out that Georgia now has 8 commits from 8 different states, which is amazing. Scott Harris says it's hard to rate the college football running backs without rating them in the pros. I get that, but I do think it's important for those of us who obviously love college football to appreciate what that was, right? I mean, and clearly Herschel didn't have the pro career that I think he probably could have. I think one of those things that I'd love to hear more about is the decision to go to the USFL. I think that I'm not really quite old enough to fully I don't have any living memory of that. But at the time, Herschel was like the first junior to kind of leave, right? And you're going to this upstart league. It's kind of funny that Donald Trump played such a large role in all that when obviously he's become, someone that's in the news all the time now for different reasons. Like what must that have been like in Georgia? Like I would love to, I don't know if there's good books written about that or, good documentaries or something like that, but I'd like to know more about what it must have been like. Can you imagine doing DawgNation Daily when you think Herschel Walker's coming back for senior year and you're going to be wrecking the sport only to find out, no, he's actually leaving. He's going to go play in this professional league that plays his games in the spring. And like, what must that have been like around Georgia? That'd have been wild. That'd have been wild. Dogs on top asking about, is Georgia baseball, are they losing right now? Do I even dare ask? In the SEC tournament. Let's see. What is the score right now? Some of y'all can probably tell me by the time I get to this. But so they're losing 2-0 right now. Is that right? Middle of the order coming up here. So wish them well there. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm jealous. I told you that. I love college baseball. I love NCAA regionals. I love super regionals. It's a bunch of fun as you can possibly have. We'll never know what could have happened in 2020 had Georgia had that team to be able to play a season. But right now, it's not quite as good as it needs to be. Timothy Brandon says, who's going to be the most unsung hero for the Dogs this year? That's a really good question. It's a really good question. Really good question. You try to sort of, rack your brain about, who really counts as an unsung hero on a team like Georgia that's as deep as it is. I'll look to the interior of the defensive line, because veteran players like Warren Brinson, Zion Lowe, guys like that, they're going to have a real responsibility. And the thing that Georgia has been so good at lately is they just take you out the knees, figuratively speaking, of course, to begin the game because they just completely remove your ability to run the football. And, that doesn't seem so fashionable in the sport right now because everybody's all about the throwing game and stuff like that. But Georgia's ability to impact quarterbacks in the passing game is made so much more potent by the fact that they just literally remove any chance of you being able to run the football. They take that away from you in the coach's room, right? From a game planning standpoint, we see teams simply choose not to run against Georgia because they don't believe they're going to be able to. And so some of those veteran interior defensive linemen who, are kind of just sort of thought to be kind of an ensemble kind of committee type group, but taking away that run for them is going to be really important. Really important. All right, very quickly, final comments, so we got to go. Yeah, so Don Wynn, thank you. 3-0 South Carolina over Georgia right now. I'd love to see them stay alive. I really would. But if they lose this one, it is donezo for this season. Back on YouTube one more time. Jerry Dog Fan says Atlanta looked like they were built to win a Super Bowl with Vic. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I kind of remember from that era is I didn't think that Greg Knapp, who was Jim Moore's offensive coordinator, I just didn't think that he was a good fit for Vic. Honestly, the coaching staff that probably had Vic figured out the best was Dan Reeves. Dan Reeves, kind of an old school coach, whatever else. But it seemed like the coach who probably got the best out of Vic was probably Reeves. Obviously we're kind of going back to, straining the memory here a little bit. But I always thought that Vic was well suited for just like a regular traditional offense and then let him break it down and run when something goes wrong. That's the dangerous, and that's the thing that deflates a defense is when you're trying to run a regular offense and trying to stop that, and then all of a sudden the quarterback just takes off and running. I didn't think that Greg Knapp always brought enough of that out. I did not like Knapp as the offensive coordinator there. Jonathan Aaron says, I'm using my Jimbo money to go on vacations. Well, technically, I mean, listen, I'm very thankful. I'll just say it that way. I'm very thankful. Andrew Hughes. All right, let me see if I can figure out on this. So the problem, Andrew, is I'm very disorganized. So let me see if I can figure this out. I'm gonna try to screenshot this. Hold on. All right, hold on. Let me see what I can figure out. I screenshotted this. Let me see if I can figure it out. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Speaking of the Falcons, plenty of coverage, rookie minicamp going on. Braves last night against the Dodgers. Not too great on that one. But obviously the rest of the SEC, the rest of the SEC network, SEC baseball tournament, stuff like that. You got all that going on there online, ajc.com. You can check all of that out. Also, our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including this time of year, getting that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online today and stay cool and comfortable all summer long. It's rsandrews.com. We will see all of you back here tomorrow, 9:45 for our first and 15, DawgNation.com, and on the DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.